All right. Hi again, everyone. Once again, I'm MJ. And I mentioned at the beginning, in addition to being a game developer, I'm also a researcher, and I'm actually getting my PhD right now at University of California, Santa Cruz. And my PhD dissertation research is about how we use games, or how we can develop games to address different natural hazards and climate resilience, and particularly taking a community-centered focus to this. So for my PhD research, I have been developing a framework, and I'd like to share that framework with you all today. This framework might be helpful for you if it's your first time developing a game for a serious topic. Even if you have developed a serious game before, you still might find this helpful as a different lens to think about how to relate to the topic that your team chooses to address for this jam. So with that, I will present the framework for creating games for natural hazard and climate resilience. The framework itself has been developed over the past 2 years based on research and based on my team's personal experience developing a collection of games about wildfire. We've been publishing our research in professional research journals and sharing what we have learned from our process. And we just launched our games that we developed over the past 2 years following this framework. And so we feel pretty good at this point about the process that we've taken and the ability to share this process with others. I'll have a link available to play the games at the end for anyone who wants to play it. But yes, just to give you a little bit of context, the framework that I'm going to present is based on our experience developing games and also on existing research about how games are developed for these types of topics. So to give a little bit of context about how the framework is going to address community climate resilience, you can break down community resilience into several different stages. At the first stage, you think about individual change and how to help individuals make different or better choices when they're dealing with something like climate resilience. So individual change is broken down into knowledge gain, awareness, and behavior change. For knowledge gain, you might think about teaching specific concepts and details. For awareness, you might think about sparking curiosity or getting people interested and invested in the topic. And then for behavior change, you're thinking about how are you encouraging behavioral progress? How are you moving someone from their current state to the desired state you want to get them to? The second stage of developing community climate resilience is reach within the community. And this happens by dissemination or distribution of the information. So with games, you think about how are you getting your game out into the places where people need to be playing them? Do you make your game easy to be shared, easy to be accessed, etc.? Sorry, I see there's comments coming into the chat. I can answer questions at the end. It's difficult for me to watch the chat while I'm presenting, but I will answer questions at the end. So feel free to type them in the chat and I'll go back through at the end of the presentation. So the third stage is compelling large-scale change, and this concept is called collective action. How do you get a whole community or a whole group of people working towards the same better future? So within this three-stage process of developing community climate resilience, the framework that we've developed particularly focuses on two pieces of that, which is the behavior change and the dissemination. All five pieces of this are important, but these two are particularly challenging and also can be particularly well addressed by games. And so these are the two pieces that the framework focuses on. So the framework itself is divided into these four chunks, which is the process, which is the process of creating the thing, the design and development process, the product, which is the thing that you create, in this case, a game, but it could also be some other type of artifact, the play, which is how users experience it, and then the release, which is how you get it out to the world. So I'm going to go through each of these five chunks and break it down into specific steps that you can do or specific things that you might be inspired by. So within the process of designing and developing your game, you might think about community co-design. In Richard's video, he talked about interviewing people and understanding their experience, finding people who live in areas that are affected by the hazard or disaster that you want to address, and talking to those people about their experience can give you a lot of local knowledge and understanding about what it's like on the ground in places where that is that disaster or hazard is a concern. And there's a lot of local knowledge out there that is not being actively used to its fullest. So you could be one of the people who finds someone, you can find them online on social media, find someone who has experienced the type of disaster you're addressing, and ask them what their experience was like, or if they have any insights, things they wish they had known, or things that they would want other people to know. That's really useful knowledge that you can involve in your design process. It's also really helpful to think about an interdisciplinary approach to designing. And games are inherently an interdisciplinary process. You know, you have artists, you have programmers, you have sound designers. But when we're making something like a serious game specifically about climate, you want to think about some other disciplines as well, like scientists and researchers, social scientists, people who understand how disaster management works or how city planning works. Those types of experts can give you a lot of valuable information that can help you make a game that is more effective at helping people. And then this is an aspect that my team has discovered along the way, which is the value of thinking about things as dilemmas. One of the kind of instinctive ways people design serious games is that there's a right answer, and the game is just guiding people towards that right answer. But with something like natural hazards and climate and disasters, a lot of times there are not right answers. There are conflicting perspectives. And by thinking about things as a dilemma or a trade-off or a conflict, you can make a lot more interesting gameplay because you're not just sort of stepping people through this answer, this answer, this answer, and instead you have these open-ended questions that encourage exploration and discovery. The way my team has worked out these three steps was through our ideation and prototyping phases, where we went out into communities and we talked to people. I'm fortunate to live in an area that is, I mean, fortunate. I live in an area that is affected by the hazard that I'm working on, which is wildfire. And so I go out in the community, I talk to people who know about wildfire or have experienced wildfire. But this is a virtual game jam that takes place online, so you can use the internet to find people in different parts of the world that have experienced the disaster that you're focusing on. Yeah, my team, we went out into the communities, we talked to people, and we found out what were their concerns, what ideas did they have, what did they think people should know, or what would help people out. And this was really helpful for us because we learned a lot of things that we could not have figured out otherwise. So the next piece is the product, which is the thing that you're creating. And we once again have three sub pieces within this. So the first piece is we call this concept chunking. Another way to think about this is making a collection of mini games. And the idea is to have a self-contained little piece of gameplay that focuses on a specific piece of the challenge that you're addressing. This is helpful for design because if you're just trying to make one big overarching system that addresses everything about that disaster, you're going to end up with an extremely complex game that may be difficult to play, but also is difficult to create. And so we came up with this concept chunking method where you think of a specific mechanic that can help you understand a specific part of the challenge, and then you have a different mechanic for a different part of that challenge, and you bring them all together as a collection of little mini games. And this is how we have developed our game. Another piece of the product is thinking about using it not just as a way to spread information from the game, but also as a way to support discussion around the game. And so thinking about either making it multiplayer or making it the kind of game that someone is playing and someone else could be watching them play and talking to them while they play, and supporting those conversations. For our game in particular, we're thinking about families playing together. And so we're thinking about intergenerational cooperation, kids playing with their parents and grandparents, because this is a really effective way to reach different parts of the community and different audiences that might otherwise be difficult to reach. And so as you're designing your game, think about places where people could have conversation, not in the game itself, but outside of the game. And then another important aspect, and this is really going to be critical during this jam, is making sure that your game aligns with the science and is either data-driven or based on real-life scenarios. By making your game realistic in terms of the science, you help build trust. People can kind of sense it if you have things going on in your game that don't match with real life. And so by making sure that your game matches the scientific data that we have about that disaster, that can make your game much more believable to people and help build trust so that they can see that you have done the research and that you understand the problem that you're trying to address. Now, the way that my team has done this, again, because I live in an area where wildfire is a problem, I've gone out to community events about wildfire preparedness. I got to watch a burn demo where they actually burn buildings that have had home hardening or have not had home hardening. And this was really inspirational for me and helped me think through how to design my games. Richard in his video mentioned, if you're going to make a game about an ice cream shop, go to an ice cream shop and take notes. This was my equivalent. I went and watched a building burn and then took notes, and it helped me design a better game because of it. So it might be difficult for you to go to a place where the disaster is happening that you are trying to address, but you can probably find videos online. You can again talk to people who have experienced it and see if they can share their firsthand account, and find information about the actual science and the actual data so that you can base your game design on realistic scenarios. And then play. So this is an important thing to consider if you're making an interactive product for people, is to think about how they will experience it. And games are inherently an interactive product. So we want to think about what is the user doing during their experience. So some things that we have found helpful for ours is thinking about simulated systems. Simulated systems are a great way in games to show consequences, how certain actions or certain decisions lead to certain outcomes, and the impact that those have. Simulated systems tend to be a lot of fun in games because we like watching little pieces of things work together and create a bigger conceptual picture of things. Think about things like SimCity, where you see a whole top-down view of a city and all the different little pieces of it working together. Empathy and emotion is another valuable aspect of games and interactive experiences where you think about integrating some kind of storyline, or role playing where you invite the player to think from a different perspective. These types of things can really help people understand problems from different people's perspective and develop a more holistic view of the problem and a better appreciation of what other people are going through. And then autonomy. Autonomy is kind of built into games inherently. It's one of the things that makes games really fun, is that the actions that you take in the game have some tangible and concrete result, and making different actions in the game has different results. Being able to see that you are impacting the world, and then if you play again and you make different choices, you get a completely different outcome. This allows the game to have replay value so that people can play it multiple times. And that replay value then encourages people to interact with the information more, so they learn more from it, and it also encourages them to share it with other people. Because if you play a game twice or three times, you're more likely to want to share it with others. With autonomy, one of the really important things is that the player's choices are uncoerced. And this is another difficult thing with serious games. We tend to have a tendency to try to nudge the player towards what we think we want them to do. And it's helpful actually to not do that, to let them make the mistakes, let them pick weird things and see what happens. And you can see this, I'll share the games that my team has developed, but in one of the games, we do some home hardening, and you can absolutely build your house out of completely flammable material and then watch it burn to the ground. By not coercing the player into choosing the better materials, we allow people to explore and experiment, and they have a lot more fun with it. So part of this process of creating a playful experience, it's helpful to go out and see what else is out there and play existing games or look at existing tools to see what you can get inspiration from. My team got inspiration from some games that have fire mechanics in them, like RimWorld, and then we also explored some existing tools. Like the Fire Dynamics Simulator on the right, which is a tool that experts use to simulate fire. So look and see what interactive systems are out there in the world already and get some inspiration from those. So lastly is release, and this is sending your game out there into the world and getting people to play it. So in this phase, you're looking at how you can reach the community, how you can reach people who need to play this game to learn about the problem. And those community connections you formed early on can be really helpful, helping you get the games out into those communities by connecting with your community partners and sharing the game back into their community. Social sharing is another valuable way if you think about something like leaderboards or having a share button inside of your game to go to social media, easy ways for people to share the games with each other. And then that social sharing comes back to the call to action that we talked about earlier and making sure that your games have a focus on actionable strategies for people to do afterwards. And one actionable strategy is sharing the game with other people. And so if you can build that into the game and make it easy to share from within the game, that can be a really valuable way to get the game to more people and to maintain that focus of spreading the information as far as possible. Now, for the game that I have been developing, I have the QR code now, so if anyone wants to play it, you can. You can play it on the phone, you can play it in a web browser, you can play it on pretty much anything. It is hosted on itch.io as a WebGL build, so anybody can play it on any device. And we did that specifically to make it easy to share. So we have a QR code that we send to our community partners, and they can distribute it in their newsletters and get the game out as easily as possible. The lower the barrier to get the game, the more likely more people will play it. If they have to download something, that's a little bit of a barrier. If they have to pay for it, that's a really big barrier. So what we're focusing on is having as low of a barrier as possible so that people can play it as easily as possible. So here's the whole framework in a condensed format. So you can see the four different chunks and the pieces within each of those and how they all kind of fit together and build off of one another. So it's important to think about community throughout this whole process, kind of at every stage. Particularly in the beginning, we were working with the community to design, but then also as we were focusing on our data-driven and real-life scenarios approach to the product, we're bringing back in people from the community and experts to make sure that we're matching the realistic expectation. And this is a valuable thing to do during playtesting is to have experts play your game and have people with real life experience play your game and have them share their thoughts about what you are designing. So following this framework, my team developed this collection of mini games, which I shared the QR code for a moment ago. And so we built three different games and three different mini games as a collection. And so each mini game focuses on a different aspect of wildfire. We have one that is the sort of top-down simulation SimCity style gameplay, but the way the player interacts is by talking to residents. So they go to each house and they talk to the resident about what are they dealing with and what decisions are they trying to make. And then they watch a simulation of the whole community evacuating, and you see the top-down view of the city, and you see what each of those houses decided to do. We also have a home hardening game where the player is choosing different materials and then they watch their house burn. And like I said, we don't coerce their decisions here. We let them make whatever decisions they want. So if they want to make their house completely out of wood, they can see the whole thing go up in flames. And then the third one is packing up before an evacuation, gathering all of your belongings together and getting out the door. So we have these three different perspectives that we put the player through. The simulation aspect of our games, we focus on simulating the natural disaster, the wildfire component. And so we use the simulation in two of our mini games, the one about home hardening, so we can see individual parts of the house and how those burn. And then in the top-down game, you can see the whole city and how the fire moves from one house to another, how embers travel on the wind. Embers coming off of one house will blow to the next house over and set that house on fire. And so we simulated this realistic scientific phenomenon of how fire moves from one house to the next. And we create that simulation in a very narrative and interactive format. So rather than having the player like drag different sliders to impact the simulation, instead we thought it would be more meaningful for the player to talk to people living in those houses and help them make decisions before the fire. Both of these were based on our research on the actual science of how fire works, and so you can see these images taken from some of our research exploration. For the home hardening game, we also had to do some research on different materials and how likely different materials are to burn, how much different materials cost. We wanted to be fairly realistic with things. So we had to do a fair amount of research to make sure that we're making choices that reflect the real world and that are actually helping people learn the ins and outs of what to do for home hardening. And then the third one, which is going around and packing up your belongings. For this one, we really wanted to focus on a very simple mechanic because the other two were a little bit more complex and we wanted our minigame collection to be approachable to a really broad audience. So this one is basically a hidden object game. All you do is tap on objects to pick them up and take them with you, but you get to decide which objects you want to take and which objects you want to leave behind. And again, going back to autonomy, we don't tell you what to take. We actually let the player take whatever they want. You can pack every single item in the house if you want to, but you'll see by playing around with it how long it takes you to get through the whole house and to get every single item. And if you're rushed to get out the door because a fire is coming, you might not want to spend that much time taking everything. So those three games are fully playable, and I'm going to drop the link also in the chat to make it a little bit easier since I shared the QR code before, but if you don't want to play on your phone, you can also play in a web browser. So do you want to use this framework that I have presented? This is the big question that I have. This framework is part of my PhD dissertation research. So if you would like to use the framework, you can be part of my research. I will essentially ask you questions at the beginning, and then you'll use the framework during the jam, and then I'll ask you questions again at the end. I'll also be available to answer questions from you during the jam and help support you as a mentor. And so if you would like to be a part of my research and use the framework during the jam, you can scan this QR code, or you can find me on Discord, or you can email me. Basically, by signing up to use this, you're not committing to anything, you're just saying you're interested. And if you sign up, then I will share the full details of using the framework. And then this will give you the full instructions of how to use it. I have this document here. This is what I'll share with you if you would like to use the framework. So it kind of walks you through exactly what you need to know about each of these steps. And like I said, I'll be available also to help you follow these steps as well. So with that, I would like to answer any questions anyone has. I'll leave this QR code up on the screen and my contact info. And now I will take questions, and then once I'm done taking questions, I think we have Sam after me to give the final presentation for today. So let me read through some of the questions. Can you speak on a minigame based on real data that includes fictional, unrealistic content, magic, aliens, talking animals, etc., and balancing the abstraction and metaphor with making something actionable and science-based? That is a really great question, Jason. Thank you for that question. So with games, games are fantastical by nature. We don't have to align things in games with real life, and many games do not. When you are tackling a serious issue, you want to make sure that any content in your game that's about that serious issue is rooted in real life truths, because you don't want to run the risk that you are part of the misinformation going out into the world. So you want to be careful that you are choosing your topic and choosing things within your topic that are accurate. However, that doesn't mean you can't have completely unrealistic things as part of your game as well. Things like magic, for example. I don't think there's too much risk that someone playing your game is going to think that magic is real. However, if you have a hurricane in your game and the hurricane has some unrealistic behavior, people might not realize that that's unrealistic and they might be confused, and you might end up accidentally giving people false information about how hurricanes work. But if you have a realistic hurricane scenario and you have the hurricane having the kind of impact that a hurricane actually would have, but the player has a magical ability that allows them to change the world or change the environment and see the impact that those magical transformations have. I think that is a fine way to balance that. Um, Talking animals, another one. I don't think anyone's gonna be confused that talking animals are a thing. But animals are actually a really compelling narrative plot point, and so having talking animals in your world might make um, the player sort of humanize those characters and relate to them better and be very invested in protecting them. So having talking animals, I think, would be fine as well. So my advice to balancing that is just to make sure that you have these completely separate conceptual ways that you're approaching it. Something that's based on the serious topic should be realistic and based on fact. Things that are fantastical gameplay wise can be unrelated, as long as those are things that are not going to accidentally mislead the player. All right, let's see. I'm not sure if I scrolled high enough up if there was. Who are you? MJ. Oh, sorry, I didn't super introduce myself super well. I am a PhD student is what I'm doing right now. I did previously work in game development for 12 years. I worked on Call of Duty Modern Warfare Remastered and Mafia 3, and then I also worked at a bunch of startup companies. I started my own indie game studio, which I ran for 6 years. And I've done a lot with VR and AR, as well as mobile games and more traditional PC and console games. Sorry, I did not really thoroughly introduce myself at the beginning. Okay. Scrolling back down now. Do the games necessarily need to involve the player making decisions? Like obviously all games do in some sense with inputs, but do they necessarily need to be simulation games? No, it does not need to be a simulation game. I think you want the player to feel like they have some power, to feel like they're having an impact on the game. And this is true of all games, not just games about serious topics. But you can have a very compelling game that is not simulation based, particularly if you think about something that's very narrative focused, where they're having a conversation with characters in the game, where they're doing some kind of role playing, but that's still going to involve decisions. Um, Similar to Jason's question, do you think that making games with social commentary or satire that is rooted in real world situations are appropriate? I think that when you're working with a serious topic for a serious game, um, I think players enjoy satire, but it is something that you should approach very carefully, because satire does have the risk of being interpreted the wrong way, especially because with something like a game, you, the developer, are not there with the player. So you don't have the luxury of clarifying if the player takes it the wrong way. So I would just say to use caution. A lot of people enjoy satire, and making fun of real life situations is a valid way to engage with the general public, but just carefully consider different ways people might interpret it and understand the consequences if they interpret it in different ways. When it comes to the theme we have, would you say a large part of disasters translate to urgency? If so, how would you transform that urgency into the game experience? There are two sides to disasters. Urgency is what happens while the disaster is happening. And if you're thinking about preparing people for handling the disaster, so in the case of wildfire, while the wildfire is happening, there is urgency, and players need to understand that urgency in the form of time limits or constraints or things that are outside of their control, as would be the case in real life. One of our mini games has a timer, so the one where you're packing up and leaving, that one has a timer, so you have to get out quickly. The other side of disasters is preparing before a disaster ever happens. And there's less urgency with that one because typically you're talking about months, potentially years to develop that kind of preparedness. And so, on that larger scale, preparing before the disaster happens, again, speaking to wildfire, because that's what I'm familiar with. So, in that case, we're talking about things like home hardening, things like removing dead leaves or dead plants from your yard, using gravel to prevent fire from taking hold at the base of your house, changing the materials of your house where that's feasible. One of the easiest things to do is to install a metal screen in your vents. That makes it so that embers can't get inside of the vents of your house. But people with more resources and abilities might do things like changing their roof material or the sidings of their house, the material. And those types of things are not so much about urgency. They're about a long time horizon preparing before the disaster happens. What are some steps you think could balance the subtlety of a game's message while not having it too on the nose or too obscure? What's a good strategy to convey and convince story about climate change while keeping it fun? That's really something I think you're going to have to explore during your design and iteration and playtesting, because it depends a little bit on the message that you are trying to get out there into the world. The risk with subtlety is what if people don't get it? So you want to make sure that there is enough clear information that people have something to walk away with. But at the same time, people really don't like to be bashed over the head with something, especially something that maybe seems obvious to some people. So some aspect of subtlety. One of the things I think is helpful with that is I mentioned the dilemmas approach or trade-offs. And so thinking about things in terms of there's not a right answer or a best way to approach it, but rather there are multiple ways to approach it. And there are different trade-offs, there are different benefits and different challenges associated with it. So I think that can help by showing different choices or different ways things could work, avoids the pit hole of like bashing the player over the head with something that they feel is obvious. But yeah, in terms of keeping it fun, that's really something that comes down to playtesting. And there's really no way to know if something is fun until you put it in front of someone and ask them if it's fun. When you write out a game design on paper, you really can't tell, is this fun or not? You got to make it, you got to put it in front of people. It's the only way to know. Okay, credibility in the field is important. So hearing actual experience. Oh, yeah, thanks. Thank you for that, Blake. Uh, they don't have to play it. Yeah, that's true. They don't have to play it if they find it against their taste. No one is forced to play these games. And actually, that's why we're making so many of them because there are many, many people out there in the world and people appreciate different things. And our goal is to just reach as many people as possible. So, whatever way that we can do that. And that's why it's helpful to make a lot of different stuff, make stuff from different perspectives and tackling different issues, proposing different strategies. All of these things are helpful with reaching more people because people like different things. Um, yeah, knowing your target audience is very valuable. That is a great point, Blake.